There is absolutely no reason to use oil when you're sautéing onions. They have enough liquid in it that you can cook them without any oil at all. I like red onions better than any time I get a chance to use red onions. I use that over white or yellow onions, and that's because they're higher in phytonutrients. They're higher in antioxidants. Pardon me? Yeah. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. If you want to caramelize onions, that's kind of an interesting business when you're not using oil. What you do is you let it start turning your pan brown. And as you don't want it to burn. There's a fine line between turning it brown and letting it burn. But as it starts to sort of scorch the bottom of your pan, then add a little bit of, I use vegetable stock. And that will pull the caramelization that's sticking to your pan back onto your onions. I'm using pinto beans, red beans, and black beans. And the red beans are dark red kidney beans. There's something, you can of course use canned beans if you want to, and I would recommend that you get organic. I cook with organic ingredients as much as possible, almost exclusively. And I don't really like to buy ingredients in cans. I'd much prefer to cook them myself, and I freeze them in these little Pyrex containers. But it's important when you cook beans to let them soak overnight, or let them soak at least 5 hours, and then you need to boil them at least 10 minutes before you turn off the heat, before you reduce the heat. And what that does is there's a lectin in beans, and specifically in high concentrations in red beans, that can cause gastric problems. And if you boil beans for 10 minutes, it deactivates that lectin. It's called phytohemagglutinin. And so cooking them for 10 minutes deactivates it, and then you're fine. If you put beans into a slow cooker and start cooking them without having boiled them first, it actually increases the toxicity of the bean. So that's why it's important to boil your beans first.
They'll fly for miles.
We're putting, I should have done this before, and I frankly forgot about it. We're putting bell pepper and a little celery in it too. And you have the recipe. I've made this probably, I think it's the same recipe. Some of these recipes I have increased the proportions a little bit just so that I made sure I had enough to feed everybody. And we can go ahead and put the garlic. So we'll just let this cook for a minute, and we can go ahead and add this. The thing that you don't want to add first when you're making chili is you want to wait until your onions and garlic are completely done, because tomatoes will retard the cooking of your other vegetables. And so you want to make the vegetables, you want to cook them to the degree that you want them done before you add the tomatoes. Otherwise, you have to cook them much longer. Pardon me? That was red beans, kidney beans, and I put the juice in as well. These are black beans. And I'm using a little more than the recipe calls for. And these are the pinto beans. Yeah, I went ahead and added the garlic. There's enough moisture in here that the garlic's fine. If you add the garlic too soon, it's likely to scorch. I'm going to cover this and let it cook for just a minute, and then we're going to add our spices. So we're going to use this spice blend. It's a Southwestern spice blend. It's just chili spice, not to be confused with the Thai chili pepper, which is just pure pepper. We're using 4 tablespoons in this. And I think I put 4 in there, but I might have put 5, but it won't hurt it. I'm so easily distracted, you have to keep an eye on me. So we're going to use a tablespoon of cumin or cumin. Depends on how you like to say it, I suppose. And I like to spread it around a little bit so it doesn't clump in one area. We're using 1½ teaspoons of ground coriander. Just making sure nothing's sticking to the bottom. And I'm putting a teaspoon of salt. You should limit your use of salt. You don't use salt at all.
Go ahead. But
I don't tend to use salt myself, but when I'm cooking for other people, I do, because so many people have not acclimated to that. But for this amount of food, a teaspoon is very little. And what I like to do is not salt food and just put a salt shaker on, or salt on the table. If somebody wants it, they can have it. I'm going to let it cook just a little bit more to soften those. And I can my own tomatoes, and I prefer to use that. I buy tomatoes when they're in season, and I buy a ton of them, and I spend a weekend canning, and it gives me tomatoes for the rest of the year. If you want to use canned tomatoes, you can do that. I brought an extra can just in case, but I think we'll just need 2. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to move this over here, and then we're going to start on another dish. And we'll let this simmer for a little while. This is the story of my life. I forgot that I put in a cup of corn. That's a relatively new addition to for this recipe. I never grew up using corn, but I kind of like it in chili. I never added corn, but I like it, so I add it. Okay, it just gives it a nice little color and a little more nutrition.